My son-in-law slept with my wife. A week later, we went to sign the divorce papers. I pretended not to know anything. At the meeting, the lawyer handed me a document. 70% of your assets go to her. I smiled. What I did after that, I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I never imagined that at 63, I'd be standing in my own kitchen doorway, watching my world crumble in the most brutal way possible. The coffee mug slipped from my hand, shattering against the tile floor, but I barely heard the sound over the thundering of my own heartbeat. There they were, my wife Melissa and my son-in-law Marvin, locked in an embrace that left no room for doubt about what had been happening under my own roof. Her hands were tangled in his hair, his mouth on her neck, both of them completely oblivious to my presence. I should have said something, should have screamed, thrown something, demanded an explanation. Instead, I stood there frozen, watching 28 years of marriage dissolve before my eyes. The worst part wasn't just seeing Melissa with another man, it was seeing her with Marvin, the boy I'd helped raise, the man I'd welcomed into our family when he married our daughter Sarah. Melissa pulled back from him, her face flushed, and that's when she saw me. The color drained from her cheek so fast I thought she might faint. Marvin spun around, his eyes wide with panic, his shirt still wrinkled from her hands. "George, I can explain," Melissa started, but her voice cracked on my name. I held up a hand, surprised by how steady my own voice sounded when I finally spoke. "Don't. Just don't." The silence that followed felt like a physical weight pressing down on all of us. Marvin opened his mouth, then closed it again, looking like a fish gasping for air. Melissa straightened her blouse with shaking hands, trying to regain some composure. "How long?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I really wanted to know the answer. Melissa's eyes darted to Marvin, then back to me. "George, it's not what you think." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Really? Because what I think is that my wife has been sleeping with my son-in-law in my own house. Am I wrong?" Neither of them answered, which was answer enough. The funny thing about betrayal is how it changes your perspective on everything. Suddenly, all those late nights when Melissa said she was at book club made sense. All those times Marvin stopped by when Sarah was at work, claiming he needed to borrow tools or ask for advice. The knowing glances I'd caught between them at family dinners, which I'd dismissed as nothing more than friendly familiarity. I'd been such a fool. "Sarah doesn't know," Marvin finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I stared at him, this man I'd treated like a son for the past 8 years. "Of course she doesn't know." "You think I'd be standing here having a conversation if she did?" Melissa stepped forward, her eyes pleading. "George, please. We need to talk about this rationally." "Rationally?" The word tasted bitter in my mouth. "You want to talk rationally about how you've been betraying our daughter, about how you've been making a mockery of our marriage?" "It's not like that," she insisted. "What Marvin and I have, it's real, it's love." Love. She called it love while standing in the kitchen where we'd shared thousands of meals, where we'd celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, where I'd held her when her mother died. This woman who'd promised to love, honor, and cherish me until death do us part was telling me that what she had with our son-in-law was love. I felt something cold settle in my chest, replacing the initial shock and hurt. It was clarity, sharp and crystalline. I could see exactly what they expected from me. Tears, rage, threats, drama. They expected me to fall apart, to beg, to fight for a marriage that was already dead. Instead, I nodded slowly. "I see." Marvin frowned, clearly confused by my calm response. You see? "I see that you've made your choice," I said, my voice eerily steady. "Both of you." I turned to leave, then paused. "I assume you'll want a divorce, Melissa." She blinked, apparently not expecting such a direct question. We haven't discussed." "Well, discuss it," I said. "And when you've figured out what you want, let me know." I walked away then, leaving them standing in that kitchen, with their guilt and their secrets. I could hear them whispering urgently behind me, but I didn't care what they were saying. My mind was already working, already planning. That night, I lay in the guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling and thinking. 28 years of marriage, and it had come to this. Melissa sleeping soundly in our bedroom down the hall, probably relieved that I hadn't made a scene. Marvin had left shortly after our encounter, no doubt rushing home to act normal with Sarah. But I wasn't planning to act normal. I was planning something else entirely. The next morning, Melissa avoided me, staying in the bedroom until after I'd left for my office. Fine by me. I had work to do, phone calls to make, preparations to begin. If she wanted to play games, I'd show her how a man with 63 years of life experience played games. By the time I returned home that evening, I'd already set things in motion. The hardest part about pretending everything was normal wasn't the acting. It was watching them think they were getting away with it. For 7 days, I played the role of the oblivious husband perfectly. I got up each morning, made my coffee, read the newspaper, and went to work as if my world hadn't been turned upside down. Melissa, for her part, seemed almost relieved by my apparent ignorance. She'd started being extra attentive, cooking my favorite meals and asking about my day with renewed interest. Guilt, I realized, was making her try harder to be a good wife. The irony wasn't lost on me. On Tuesday, Marvin came by the house while I was supposed to be at work. I'd called in sick that morning, telling my assistant I needed to handle some personal matters. From my bedroom window, I watched him park his blue pickup truck in our driveway at exactly 2:15 p.m. He used his key, the one we'd given him for emergencies, to let himself in. I waited upstairs, listening to their voices drift up from the living room. At first, they were just talking, but within 20 minutes, I could hear them moving toward the couch. The same couch where Sarah and I had watched movies with our daughter when she was little. The same couch where Melissa and I had hosted family game nights. I didn't go downstairs to confront them. Instead, I took pictures of his truck in our driveway and noted the time in a small notebook I'd started keeping. Evidence, though I wasn't sure yet how I'd use it. Wednesday brought more of the same. Marvin arrived at 1:45 p.m. this time, stayed for exactly 2 hours. I watched from the kitchen window as they said goodbye at the back door, Melissa straightening his collar before he left. Such a tender, intimate gesture between two people who were destroying our family. That evening, Sarah called to invite us to dinner on Saturday. Melissa accepted enthusiastically, chatting with our daughter about her new job at the marketing firm downtown. She sounded so normal, so maternal, asking about Sarah's co-workers and whether she was eating enough vegetables. "Tell Dad I said hi," Sarah said before hanging up. "Sarah sends her love," Melissa told me, smiling as if butter wouldn't melt in her mouth. I smiled back. "Tell her we're looking forward to Saturday." If only she knew that her husband had spent the afternoon in our bed while she was working to build their future together. Thursday was when Melissa made her move. I was reading in my study when she knocked on the door. She'd dressed carefully. The blue dress I'd always told her looked beautiful on her. Her hair styled the way she used to wear it when we were younger. "George, we need to talk," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. I looked up from my book, feigning mild curiosity. "About what?" She fidgeted with her wedding ring, twisting it around her finger. "About us, about our marriage." "What about it?" "I think." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I think we've grown apart. We're not the same people we were when we got married." I nodded thoughtfully, as if this was the first time such an idea had occurred to me. "You think so?" "Yes, I do. We hardly talk anymore. We sleep in the same bed, but we might as well be strangers." Her voice grew stronger, more confident, as if she was warming to her rehearsed speech. "I've been thinking that maybe we should consider a trial separation." "A trial separation?" I repeated slowly, "just to give us both some space to figure out what we really want. We could divide our assets temporarily, and then after 6 months or so, we could reevaluate." Divide our assets. There it was, the real reason for this conversation. She wasn't just planning to leave me for Marvin. She was planning to take half of everything I'd worked for in the process. "Have you given any thought to how that would work?" I asked calmly. She brightened, clearly thinking she'd gotten me on board. "Well, I was thinking I could keep the house, at least initially. You have your office downtown, so you could easily find a small apartment nearby. We could split the savings accounts 50-50 and the investment portfolio." I listened to her lay out her plan with growing admiration for her audacity. She had it all figured out, how to get rid of me while keeping the lifestyle I'd provided. She even suggested that I could have the cabin upstate that she'd always claimed to hate, as if she was doing me a favor. "What about Sarah?" I asked when she finished. "What about her? How do we explain this to our daughter?" Melissa's confidence wavered slightly. "We tell her we've decided to take some time apart, that sometimes people need space to rediscover themselves." "And Marvin, how do we explain it to him?" She flinched at the mention of his name, though she tried to hide it. "The same way, Adults will understand that marriages sometimes evolve. Evolve. What a delicate way to describe adultery. I'll need time to think about this, I said finally. Of course. Take all the time you need. She stood up, smoothing down her dress. I just want you to know that this isn't about blame or fault. It's about both of us being honest about what we want. What we want. As if I wanted any of this. That night, I lay in the guest room again, listening to her move around in our bedroom. She was humming softly, something she only did when she was happy. The sound made my chest tight with a mixture of grief and rage. Friday was my last day of playing the fool. I spent it at my lawyer's office explaining the situation to Richard Hawthorne, a man I'd known for 15 years. Richard listened without judgment, occasionally taking notes. What exactly are you hoping to accomplish, George? He asked when I finished. Justice, I said simply. She wants to destroy our marriage for her own selfish reasons. Fine, but she's not going to profit from it. Richard leaned back in his chair. What you're describing would be legal, but it's also risky. If she finds out what you're planning. She won't, I assured him. I just need everything prepared so that when she files for divorce, I'm ready. And you're certain about this course of action? I thought about Marvin's truck in my driveway, about Melissa's tender gesture straightening his collar, about Sarah's voice on the phone, full of love and trust for the two people who were betraying her most brutally. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. That evening, Melissa cooked my favorite dinner, pot roast with all the trimmings. She lit candles and opened a bottle of wine, creating the kind of romantic atmosphere we hadn't shared in years. I love you, George, she said over dessert, reaching across the table to take my hand. I hope you know that. Whatever happens between us, I want you to know that the years we've had together have meant everything to me. I squeezed her hand gently and smiled. I love you too, Melissa. It was the last lie I would ever tell her. Monday morning she would ask for a divorce, and I would be ready. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that usually made me feel optimistic about the day ahead. But as I adjusted my tie in the bathroom mirror, I felt something different. A cold, calculating calm that surprised even me. Melissa had been up early. I could hear her moving around downstairs, making coffee and breakfast. When I came down, she was sitting at the kitchen table with a manila folder beside her plate, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug like she was trying to draw warmth from it. Good morning, I said, pouring myself coffee and settling across from her. She looked up, and I could see the nervousness in her eyes despite her attempt at composure. George, I've been thinking about our conversation the other night. Oh? I think we should make this official. The separation, I mean. She touched the manila folder. I've already spoken to a lawyer. Of course she had. I took a sip of my coffee, noting how bitter it tasted this morning. That was fast. I just want to get this settled quickly, for both our sakes, and for Sarah's sake too. She opened the folder, revealing a neat stack of papers. My attorney says we can handle this amicably, without a lot of drama or expense. Her attorney, not our attorney, hers. She'd already chosen sides and drawn battle lines, all while telling me this wasn't about blame or fault. What does your attorney suggest? I asked. She relaxed slightly, probably thinking I was going to make this easy for her. Well, since we don't have any minor children to worry about, it's mostly about dividing assets. The house would stay with me, along with the primary savings accounts. You'd get the cabin, your retirement fund, and we'd split the investment portfolio 60-40. 60-40 in whose favor? In my favor. She had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I am giving up my career to maintain the household all these years, George. My attorney says that entitles me to a larger share. I nodded slowly. Melissa had worked part-time as a real estate agent for exactly 3 years, early in our marriage, before deciding she preferred being a homemaker. She'd been good at it too. The house was always perfect, meals were elaborate, and she'd organized our social life with military precision, but giving up her career. That was stretching the truth considerably. What about alimony? I asked. Temporary spousal support for 2 years, just to help me get back on my feet. Get back on her feet. With Marvin, presumably, though she couldn't say that part out loud. I'd like my own attorney to look this over, I said. Her face tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. But George, I hope we can keep this civil. For Sarah's sake. Always for Sarah's sake. Never mind that Sarah was going to be devastated when she learned her mother was leaving her father for her own husband. I'll have Richard Hawthorne review everything and get back to you, I said. Richard Hawthorne? Isn't he a bit aggressive for something like this? I smiled. He's thorough. I want to make sure everything is fair. That afternoon, I called Melissa from my office. Richard can meet with us and your attorney tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Does that work? Tomorrow? That's awfully fast. You said you wanted to get this settled quickly. There was a pause. Yes, of course. I'll call Jennifer and confirm. Jennifer Morse. I'd looked her up after Melissa mentioned her name. Fresh out of law school, inexperienced in family law, probably charging bargain rates, Melissa had chosen her attorney the same way she chose everything else, based on what would be easiest and most convenient for her. Tuesday afternoon, we sat in Richard's conference room like civilized adults discussing the end of our marriage. Melissa wore her navy blue suit, the one that made her look professional and serious. Jennifer Morse was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 30s, with nervous energy and a habit of shuffling through her papers unnecessarily. Richard spread Melissa's proposed settlement across the mahogany table. Let's walk through this point by point, he said in his measured voice. For 45 minutes, we discussed the division of our assets like we were negotiating a business deal. The house, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, worth approximately $450,000. The savings accounts, $230,000 combined. The investment portfolio, $1.7 million, accumulated over nearly 3 decades of careful planning and smart decisions. My client is being very generous, Jennifer said when Richard questioned the 60-40 split. Mrs. Henderson could easily argue for half of everything. Could she? Richard asked mildly. Based on what legal precedent? I watched this exchange with detached interest, noting how Melissa's jaw tightened every time Richard challenged something. She'd expected this to be a formality, a rubber stamp on her escape plan. What about the cabin property? Richard asked. Mr. Henderson can have it, Jennifer said quickly. My client has no interest in maintaining a second property. Of course she didn't. The cabin was where I went to fish and think. 40 acres of woods and lakefront that Melissa had always considered a waste of money. She had no idea what it was actually worth. I'd been carefully developing the land for years, and it was now appraised at nearly $800,000. And Mr. Henderson's business interests? Richard continued. What business interests? Jennifer frowned, flipping through her papers. I owned a consulting firm that specialized in helping small businesses optimize their operations. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was profitable. More importantly, I'd structured it in ways that Melissa had never bothered to understand. My client owns Henderson Business Solutions, Richard explained. It's currently valued at approximately $2.3 million. Melissa's eyes widened. $2.3 million? George, you never told me the business was worth that much. You never asked, I said simply. Jennifer was frantically scribbling notes. We'll need to factor that into the settlement negotiations. Of course, Richard agreed. But you should know that Mr. Henderson has been considering selling the business. In fact, he's received a very attractive offer from a competitor. This was news to Melissa, and I could see her mind racing, trying to calculate what this meant for her settlement. How attractive an offer? Jennifer asked. $3.8 million, Richard said. The sale would close within 30 days. The number hung in the air like smoke. Melissa was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Surprise, calculation, maybe even a flicker of respect. Well, Jennifer said after a moment, this certainly changes the scope of the settlement. It does indeed, Richard agreed. Which is why my client would like to propose a different arrangement. He pulled out a fresh set of documents. Mr. Henderson is willing to give Mrs. Henderson 70% of all liquid assets, the house, savings accounts, and investment portfolio. In exchange, he retains full ownership of the business and the cabin property. I watched Melissa's face as she processed this. 70% of the liquid assets would give her nearly $2 million, more money than she'd ever dreamed of having. That seems very generous, Jennifer said cautiously. My client believes in being fair, Richard said. He has no interest in a prolonged legal battle. Melissa was nodding slowly. George, are you sure about this? You're giving me a lot more than I asked for. I met her eyes across the table. I'm sure. I just want this to be over so we can both move on with our lives. She smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in weeks. Thank you. This is more than fair. We spent another hour working out the details. Richard explained that the house would need to be transferred to Melissa's name. The investment accounts would be split according to the new arrangement, and I would retain the business and cabin property. When can we finalize this? Melissa asked. I can have the papers ready by Friday, Richard said. We can sign everything then. As we gathered our things to leave, Melissa touched my arm. George, I know this hasn't been easy. I want you to know that I'll always care about you. I know, I said. I want you to be happy, Melissa. And I meant it. I wanted her to be very happy with her 70%, right up until she discovered what 70% of nothing actually meant. Walking to the parking garage, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. In 3 days, Melissa would sign papers that would give her exactly what she deserved. She just didn't know it yet. Friday morning, Melissa was practically glowing. She'd spent the previous evening on the phone with what she claimed was her sister, but I could hear the deeper tones of a male voice through the receiver. Marvin, no doubt, celebrating their upcoming windfall. She dressed carefully for our appointment. A cream-colored dress that had always been one of my favorites, paired with the pearl necklace I'd given her for our 20th anniversary. She was dressing for victory, and she wanted to look good doing it. Are you nervous? She asked as we drove to Richard's office. Should I be? No, of course not. I want you to know that I appreciate how gracious you're being about all this. Gracious. The word almost made me laugh. If she only knew how gracious I was really being. Richard's conference room felt different this time. Maybe it was the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows, or maybe it was the finality of what we were about to do. Jennifer Morse was already there when we arrived, looking more confident than she had on Tuesday. Everything's in order, Richard announced, spreading the final documents across the table. Mrs. Henderson, you'll need to sign here, here, and here. He pointed to several flagged pages. This transfers 70% of the liquid assets to your name. Melissa signed each page with a flourish, like she was autographing books. I signed where indicated, playing my part perfectly. And this, Richard said, sliding another document toward me, finalizes the sale of Henderson Business Solutions to Morrison Consulting Group. I signed that paper too, noting how Melissa's eyes followed my pen across the page. $3.8 million, changing hands with a simple signature. Congratulations, Jennifer said to both of us. You've handled this very maturely. We shook hands all around, exchanged pleasantries about staying in touch, and walked out into the hallway together. In the elevator, Melissa was quiet, but I could feel the excitement radiating from her. So it's done, she said as we reached the parking garage. It's done. George, I thank you for making this easy. I smiled. You're welcome, Melissa. I hope you get everything you deserve. She hugged me then, a quick, awkward embrace that smelled of her expensive perfume and felt like saying goodbye to a stranger. I'll start moving my things out this weekend, I said. There's no rush. Take your time. Of course there was no rush. She was probably already planning to have Marvin move in before my boxes were even packed. That evening, I had dinner alone at the cabin for the first time in 28 years. The silence was profound, broken only by the sound of water lapping against the dock and the occasional call of a loon across the lake. I'd brought a bottle of good scotch and my father's old fishing rod, and I sat on the porch watching the sun set over water that belonged entirely to me. My phone rang around 9 o'clock. Melissa's number. George? I hope I'm not bothering you. Not at all. How are you settling in? Well, that's actually why I'm calling. Her voice sounded strange, tight, controlled. I went to the bank today to transfer the investment accounts, and there seems to be some kind of problem. What kind of problem? The accounts. They're not what we thought they were. I took a sip of scotch, savoring the burn. What do you mean? The portfolio we discussed, the $1.7 million. Most of it appears to be tied up in something called Henderson Holdings LLC. The bank says I can't access those funds without additional documentation. Henderson Holdings LLC, the company I'd established 6 months ago, right around the time I first noticed Melissa and Marvin's lingering glances across the dinner table. A company that owned several investment properties, held various business contracts, and served as the parent organization for Henderson Business Solutions. That's strange, I said. Have you called Richard? I tried, but he's not available until Monday. George, what is Henderson Holdings? It's a holding company I set up for tax purposes. I thought I mentioned it to you. Silence. Then, no, you definitely didn't mention it. I'm sure it's just a paperwork issue. These things happen with business transfers. Business transfers? Her voice was getting sharper. George, what business transfers? I stood up, walking to the porch railing. The lake was perfectly still, reflecting the stars like scattered diamonds. When I sold Henderson Business Solutions to Morrison Group, they actually bought Henderson Holdings, which was the parent company. It's a fairly common structure. More silence. I could almost hear her mind working, trying to understand what this meant. So the investment accounts were assets of Henderson Holdings, I finished, which means they were part of the business sale. But that's not possible. The business was only worth $2.3 million. You sold it for $3.8 million. Actually, Henderson Holdings was worth $3.8 million. The business was just one component of the company's total value. I heard her sharp intake of breath. George, are you telling me that the money I thought I was getting was never yours to begin with? I said gently. The liquid assets you received were the house, our personal savings accounts, and my personal retirement fund. The investment portfolio belonged to the company. But that's only... I could hear papers rustling in the background. That's only $400,000, plus the house. The house has a mortgage, I reminded her, about $250,000 still owed. And there are some other liens against it that will need to be satisfied. What liens? Business loans that I secured using the house as collateral. Nothing to worry about. The monthly payments are only about $4,000. The silence stretched so long I wondered if she'd hung up. Finally, her voice came back, much smaller than before. George, what have you done? I've given you exactly what you asked for, I said. 70% of our liquid assets, just like we agreed. This isn't what I asked for. Isn't it? You wanted the house, the savings accounts, and a generous portion of our investments. That's what you got. But the house has liens against it. Business necessities. I had to secure some loans to facilitate the sale of Henderson Holdings. The new owners required certain financial guarantees. And you used our house as collateral without telling me. I used my house as collateral for my business. At the time, we were still married. I could hear her crying now, soft sobs that she was trying to muffle. George, please, there has to be some mistake. No mistake, Melissa. Everything was done legally and properly. Richard made sure of that. Richard knew about this. Richard handled all the legal work for Henderson Holdings. He's been my attorney for 15 years, but he's supposed to be representing both of us. He was representing me. You had your own attorney, remember? Jennifer should have advised you to have the business interests appraised independently. More silence. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. How long have you known? Known what? About Marvin and me. I looked out over the lake, watching a fish jump in the distance, sending ripples across the reflected starlight. Long enough. George, I can explain. You don't need to explain anything to me anymore, Melissa. We're divorced. You're free to be with whoever you want. But the money. George, I can't afford the payments on the house. $4,000 a month? Then you'll need to sell it. The market's terrible right now. With the liens against it, I'd lose money on the sale. Then you'll need to find another solution. Maybe Marvin can help. I heard her sharp intake of breath. You know about Marvin. I know lots of things, Melissa. I know he's been coming to the house while I was at work. I know you've been planning this for months. I know you thought you were going to take half of everything I've worked for and start a new life with my son-in-law. George, please, we can work something out. We did work something out. We signed papers this afternoon, remember? But I didn't understand what I was signing. You had an attorney. You chose not to ask the right questions. The crying was harder now. Less controlled. What am I supposed to do? The same thing I was supposed to do when I found you with Marvin in my kitchen, I said. Figure it out. I hung up and turned off my phone. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. The next few weeks unfolded exactly as I'd predicted, though even I was surprised by how quickly everything fell apart. I heard about it first through Sarah. She called me on a Tuesday evening, her voice thick with confusion and hurt. Dad, what's going on with Mom? She called me crying, saying something about losing the house. And why didn't you tell me about the divorce? I'd been dreading this conversation, but I'd also been preparing for it. Your mother and I decided we'd grown apart, sweetheart. We thought it was best to separate. But she's saying you tricked her somehow, that you hid money from her. I didn't hide anything, Sarah. Everything was handled through attorneys. Your mother got exactly what she asked for. There was a long pause. Dad, she sounds desperate. She's asking me for money. Of course she was. How much? $15,000. She says it's just temporary, until she can sort out some paperwork with the bank. $15,000. Probably what she needed to make the next few mortgage payments while she figured out her next move. What did you tell her? I told her Marvin and I don't have that kind of money. Dad, she got angry when I mentioned Marvin. Really angry. She started saying things about him that didn't make any sense. I could imagine what those things were. Melissa was discovering that love didn't pay the bills, and that Marvin wasn't quite the financial solution she'd thought he'd be. Sarah, I need to tell you something, and it's going to be difficult to hear. What? I took a deep breath. Your mother has been having an affair with Marvin. The silence that followed was so complete I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard her sharp intake of breath. That's not possible. I caught them together, sweetheart, in our house. No. Her voice was small like a child's. No, that can't be true. I'm sorry. I didn't want you to find out this way. Marvin wouldn't. He loves me. We're married. We're trying to have a baby. The pain in her voice cut through me like a blade. This was the part I'd hated most about Melissa and Marvin's betrayal. Not what they'd done to me, but what they'd done to Sarah. I'm sorry, I said again, because there was nothing else to say. How long? She whispered. I don't know. At least a few months. I heard her crying then, soft sobs that reminded me of when she was little and had scraped her knee or lost a favorite toy. Except this wasn't something I could fix with a bandage and a kiss. Dad, I don't understand. Why would they do this? I don't know, sweetheart. People make choices that hurt the people they're supposed to love most. What am I supposed to do now? Whatever you need to do, take your time. Don't make any decisions while you're emotional. I can't go home. I can't face him. Come stay at the cabin. Take as long as you need. 2 days later, Sarah arrived with 3 suitcases and eyes swollen from crying. She looked fragile in a way that made my chest ache, like someone had taken my strong, confident daughter and replaced her with a broken stranger. We didn't talk much that first day. She slept until noon, then sat on the dock staring at the water while I worked in my study. But that evening, as we sat on the porch eating the simple dinner I'd prepared, she finally spoke. I confronted Marvin. I set down my fork. How did that go? He denied it at first, said you were lying because you were bitter about the divorce. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Then I told him I'd already talked to Mom and she'd admitted everything. What did he say then? He cried. Can you believe that? He actually cried and said it just happened, that he never meant for it to go this far. She shook her head. He said Mom seduced him. Of course he did. In Marvin's version of events, he was the victim, the innocent young man led astray by the experienced older woman. Never mind that he was 32 years old and had been married to Sarah for 8 years. Do you believe him? I don't know what to believe anymore. She picked at her food, not really eating. Dad, did you know Mom was capable of something like this? It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself. Had there been signs I'd missed? Looking back, I could see moments that might have been clues. Times when Melissa seemed restless, dissatisfied with our quiet life. But I'd attributed that to normal midlife adjustments, not to her planning to destroy our family. I thought I knew your mother, I said finally, but people can surprise you. Have you talked to her since the divorce? She's called a few times, and she wants me to help her with the house payments. Sarah looked up sharply. Are you going to? No. Good. Her voice was fierce, angrier than I'd heard it since she arrived. She made her choice. Now she can live with it. Over the next few days, I learned more about the extent of Melissa and Marvin's situation. Sarah had spoken to her mother again, and the conversation had been explosive. She's furious with Marvin, Sarah told me. Apparently, he promised her he had money saved up that they could start over together, but it turns out most of his savings went to pay off credit card debt. I wasn't surprised. Marvin had always lived beyond his means, buying expensive gadgets and taking vacations he couldn't afford. I'd chalked it up to youthful irresponsibility, never imagining he was positioning himself as a wealthy catch for my wife. She's also angry because he won't leave his job to help her figure out the house situation. She expected him to drop everything and focus on solving their problems. And he told her he can't afford to lose his income, especially now that they're both going to be paying for divorces. The reality of adult life was setting in for both of them. Love affairs were romantic and exciting when they were stolen moments in someone else's house, but when you had to pay rent, legal fees, and mortgage payments, the fantasy lost some of its appeal. Sarah, can I ask you something? Sure. What are you going to do about Marvin? She was quiet for a long time, staring out at the lake. I filed for divorce yesterday. I felt a mixture of pride and sadness. Pride because she was strong enough to walk away from someone who had betrayed her so completely. Sadness because at 26, She was having to rebuild her life in ways no one should have to. I'm proud of you, I said. Are you? Because I feel like such an idiot. All those times he came here to help you with projects or borrow tools. I actually thanked him for being so good to you. You're not an idiot. You trusted your husband and your mother. That's what normal people do. Normal people don't have affairs with their daughter's spouse. No, they don't. 2 weeks later, the house went into foreclosure. Melissa called me, sobbing, begging me to help her save it. George, please. I know I made mistakes, but I can't lose everything. You're not losing everything, I said calmly. You're losing the house you couldn't afford to keep. But it's our home, our memories, your memories. Mine were tainted the day I found you with Marvin in our kitchen. I'll do anything. I'll end things with Marvin. We can try again. The desperation in her voice was almost painful to hear, almost. Melissa, we're divorced. There is no we anymore. But I love you. I know I made a mistake, but I still love you. If you loved me, you wouldn't have slept with our son-in-law. It was just physical. It didn't mean anything. Then you destroyed our marriage for something that didn't mean anything. That's even worse. She hung up on me. The house sold at auction 3 weeks later for less than the amount owed on the mortgage. Melissa was forced to declare bankruptcy. The last I heard, she'd moved into a small apartment across town and was working as a cashier at a grocery store. Marvin, facing his own divorce and the collapse of his relationship with Melissa, had moved back in with his parents. At 32 years old, he was starting over with nothing but debt and the reputation of a man who'd betrayed his wife with her own mother. They'd gotten exactly what they deserved. 6 months after the divorce, I stood on the dock at dawn, watching mist rise from the lake like spirits returning to heaven. Sarah was still asleep in the cabin behind me, but she'd be up soon. She'd developed a habit of joining me for morning coffee on the porch. My daughter had been living with me for 4 months now, and watching her heal had been one of the unexpected gifts of this whole ordeal. The broken woman who'd arrived with tear-stained cheeks had gradually transformed back into the strong, confident person I'd raised. She'd started freelancing as a graphic designer, working from the cabin's converted loft, and she was building a client base that would support her when she was ready to move on. "Good morning, Dad." I turned to find her approaching with 2 steaming mugs of coffee, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing the old sweatshirt she'd claimed from my closet. "Morning, sweetheart. Sleep well?" "Better." She handed me a mug and settled into the chair beside mine. I had the dream again, but this time it didn't wake me up. The dream was always the same. She was back in her old house with Marvin, and everything was normal until she opened a door and found him with Melissa. Sarah's therapist said the dreams would fade with time, that her subconscious was processing the betrayal in the only way it knew how. "That's progress," I said. "Dr. Martinez thinks so too." She sipped her coffee, watching a family of ducks paddle past the dock. She also thinks I'm ready to start dating again. I tried to keep my expression neutral. As a father, the idea of Sarah dating made me want to lock her in the cabin forever. As a man who'd learned the hard way that life was too short to waste on the wrong people, I wanted her to find someone who would treasure her the way she deserved. "How do you feel about that?" "Terrified," she admitted with a laugh. "But also, ready? I don't want to spend the rest of my life afraid to trust people." "Good. Fear is useful for keeping you safe, but it's a terrible way to live." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher above the trees. This had become our ritual: morning coffee on the dock, talking about everything and nothing, rebuilding our relationship in ways we'd never had time for when life was more complicated. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you ever regret what you did? The way you handled the divorce?" It was a question I'd been expecting, and one I'd thought about carefully. Did I regret giving Melissa exactly what she'd asked for, knowing it would ruin her financially? Did I regret letting her discover the truth about my assets, only after it was too late to change course? "No," I said finally. "I don't regret it." "Even though she's struggling now?" "Sarah, your mother made a choice to destroy our family for her own selfish reasons. She wasn't thinking about you or me, or the consequences of her actions. She was only thinking about what she wanted. But she's living in that tiny apartment now, working at a grocery store. Because of choices she made. I didn't force her to have an affair. I didn't force her to lie to me for months. I didn't force her to ask for a divorce so she could be with Marvin." I turned to look at my daughter. All I did was protect myself from being taken advantage of. Sarah nodded slowly. I guess I just feel sorry for her sometimes. You can feel sorry for her and still recognize that she brought this on herself. The two aren't mutually exclusive. What about Marvin? That was harder to answer. Marvin had been like a son to me, and his betrayal had cut almost as deep as Melissa's. But he was also younger, more easily influenced, and I suspected he'd been as much Melissa's victim as her co-conspirator. Marvin made his choice too, but he's young enough to recover from it if he learns from his mistakes. Have you talked to him? Once. He called about a month ago, wanting to apologize. What did you say? I told him I accepted his apology, but that our relationship was over. Some things can't be undone. Sarah was quiet for a moment. He asked me to forgive him too, said he'd spend the rest of his life making it up to me if I'd give him another chance. And? I told him the same thing you did. Some things can't be undone. I felt a surge of pride. Sarah had learned one of life's hardest lessons, that forgiveness didn't require reconciliation, and that some betrayals were too fundamental to overcome. My phone buzzed with a text message. Richard Hawthorne, asking if I could meet with him next week about a new business opportunity. The sale of Henderson Holdings had left me with more money than I'd ever expected to have, and I was considering my options carefully. Work? Sarah asked, noticing my phone. Richard wants to discuss some investment opportunities. Are you thinking about starting another business? Maybe. Or maybe I'll just invest in other people's businesses. I have time to figure it out. Time. It was something I'd never had enough of during my marriage. Between building my business and maintaining the lifestyle Melissa expected, I'd been constantly busy, always chasing the next goal. Now, at 63, I was discovering the luxury of unhurried mornings and unscheduled afternoons. Dad, are you happy? The question caught me off guard. Was I happy? My marriage had ended in betrayal and divorce. My relationship with my son-in-law was destroyed. My daughter was rebuilding her life after her own devastating betrayal. By most measures, my life had fallen apart. But sitting here on this dock, watching the sun climb above a lake that belonged entirely to me, sharing coffee with a daughter who was becoming my closest friend, I realized something surprising. Yes, I said. I think I am. Really. Really. For the first time in years, I'm living my own life on my own terms. I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not, or maintain a lifestyle I don't care about, or stay married to someone who doesn't respect me. But aren't you lonely? Sometimes. But there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. I'd rather be alone and peaceful than surrounded by people who don't really care about me. Sarah smiled. Dr. Martinez says the same thing, that it's better to be alone for the right reasons than with someone for the wrong reasons. Smart woman. Dad, can I tell you something? Of course. I'm proud of you, the way you handled everything. I know it would have been easier to just give Mom what she wanted and avoid the conflict, but you stood up for yourself. You showed me that it's okay to protect yourself, even from family. Her words hit me harder than I'd expected. For months I'd questioned whether I'd done the right thing, whether I'd been too harsh, too calculating, too unforgiving. But hearing Sarah say she was proud of me made me realize something important. I hadn't just protected my assets, I'd protected my dignity. Thank you, sweetheart. That means more to me than you know. We finished our coffee as the morning mist cleared completely, revealing a lake so still it looked like polished glass. Somewhere across the water, a loon called out, its voice echoing off the trees like a song of freedom. Later that afternoon, as Sarah worked in her loft studio and I read in my study, my phone rang. Melissa's number. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken in 2 months, not since she'd called, begging me to help her avoid bankruptcy, but something made me pick up. Hello, Melissa. George. Her voice was different, smaller, sadder, but also somehow cleaner. I hope I'm not bothering you. What do you need? Nothing. I wanted to apologize. Really apologize, not just ask for help. I set down my book. Okay. I know you have no reason to believe me. But I need you to know that I'm sorry, not just for the affair, but for all of it, for taking you for granted, for thinking I could have everything without consequences, for hurting Sarah. I appreciate that. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to say it. Melissa, can I ask you something? Of course. Why? Why throw away 28 years for someone like Marvin? She was quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, because I felt invisible. In our marriage, in our life, I felt like I was just going through the motions. And Marvin made me feel seen again, desired again. It was stupid and selfish, but it felt like being alive. You could have talked to me about feeling invisible. Could I? George, when was the last time we had a real conversation before all this happened? When was the last time you asked me how I was feeling, or what I wanted? The question stung because there was truth in it. Our marriage had become routine, comfortable but not passionate. We'd been coexisting rather than truly living together. You're right, I admitted, but that doesn't justify what you did. No, it doesn't. I should have talked to you. I should have suggested counseling, or a separation, or anything other than what I did. I was a coward. Yes, you were. George, are you happy now? Yes. Are you? No. But I'm learning to live with the consequences of my choices. And maybe someday I'll figure out how to be happy again. I hope you do. Take care of yourself, George, and tell Sarah. Tell her I love her, even though I know that doesn't fix anything. I'll tell her. After she hung up, I sat in my study for a long time, thinking about the woman I'd been married to for nearly 3 decades. The conversation hadn't changed anything. I still wouldn't help her financially, and I still had no interest in reconciliation. But it had given me something I hadn't expected: closure. That evening, Sarah and I grilled fish on the deck and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. As the first stars appeared overhead, she turned to me with a smile. You know what I realized today? What's that? This feels more like home than anywhere I've ever lived. I looked around at the simple cabin, the weathered dock, the lake that reflected stars like scattered diamonds. She was right. This felt like home in ways the suburban house never had. Then stay as long as you want, I said. Forever, if you like. Don't tempt me. I might actually take you up on that. The offer stands. Later, after Sarah had gone to bed, I walked out to the end of the dock and stood listening to the gentle lap of water against the pilings. The night was clear and still, filled with the kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. I thought about Melissa, working the late shift at a grocery store, learning to live on minimum wage. I thought about Marvin, back in his childhood bedroom, trying to rebuild his life from scratch. I thought about Sarah, sleeping soundly in the cabin behind me, slowly healing from wounds that would make her stronger. And I thought about myself, a 63-year-old man who'd lost his marriage but found his freedom. For the first time in my adult life, I was exactly where I wanted to be, with exactly the people I wanted to be with, living exactly the life I chose. It had taken losing everything I thought I wanted to discover what I actually needed. Standing there under a canopy of stars, surrounded by water and silence and possibility, I finally understood what happiness felt like. It felt like coming home. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.